In the outer districts of Saint Petersburg, there are Soviet apartment buildings that seem older at night. Not physically older, but heavier somehow. The concrete looks darker after midnight. The corridors feel longer. Elevator lights hum louder than they should. And sometimes, when the snow falls hard enough outside, the buildings begin producing sounds that tenants stop talking about after a few years. Most people blame old wiring, or bad insulation, or loneliness. Especially in winter. Building 47 stood at the edge of a forgotten residential block nearly 40 minutes from the city center. 14 stories tall according to local residents. Except official records listed only 13. That discrepancy existed for decades. Most tenants never noticed it. The mailboxes skipped directly from 12 to 13. Utility documents showed 13 residential levels. Fire evacuation maps displayed the same thing. And yet the elevator panel inside Building 47 still contained a faded button marked 14. The button no longer lit up. At least during the day. Nikolai Sidorov first noticed the problem during January of 2025. He worked night security for several aging apartment complexes owned by a private management company slowly buying abandoned Soviet-era housing throughout the city outskirts. Most of the job involved checking utility rooms, stopping drunk teenagers from breaking entrance doors, and responding to complaints from elderly residents who believed someone was stealing electricity from the hallways. The work was quiet. That was why Nikolai liked it. After his divorce 2 years earlier, silence became easier than conversation. Most nights he simply sat behind the reception desk drinking bitter coffee while old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and snow covered the empty courtyards outside. Building 47 was supposed to be temporary. Several tenants had recently moved out after repeated electrical failures and elevator malfunctions. The management company planned to renovate parts of the structure during spring, but until then Nikolai was assigned overnight monitoring shifts 3 times a week. The first strange thing happened at 2:13 a.m. Nikolai sat alone near the lobby entrance scrolling through security reports when the elevator suddenly activated by itself. The old Soviet lift groaned somewhere above the building before slowly descending floor by floor. The numbers glowed weak amber above the elevator door. No residents had entered the lobby for nearly an hour. Nikolai frowned and checked the security monitor connected to the hallway cameras. Nothing. Every corridor remained empty. The elevator continued descending. Its cables groaned loudly through the walls. Then the display flickered strangely. For less than a second, another number appeared above the panel. Nikolai stared at it. The number vanished immediately. Now the display showed 4. Then 3. Then 2. The elevator finally reached the lobby with a heavy metallic thud. The doors opened slowly. Empty cabin. No passengers. Only weak fluorescent light flickering overhead inside the lift. Nikolai stood up carefully. Hello? No answer. The building remained silent except for distant pipes knocking somewhere deep inside the walls. He stepped toward the elevator and looked inside. The interior smelled faintly of dust and cigarette smoke. Old mirrors covered the side walls beneath scratches and yellowed emergency instructions from the late Soviet years. Everything normal. Then Nikolai noticed the floor indicator above the control panel. The number 14 was glowing softly. Not blinking. Steady. He pressed it once. Nothing happened. The light disappeared immediately. For several seconds Nikolai simply stood there listening to the low electrical hum inside the elevator shaft. Then the radio attached to his security desk crackled loudly behind him. The sudden noise made him flinch. Static filled the lobby for several seconds before a woman's voice emerged briefly through interference. Someone is walking on 14, then silence returned. Nikolai grabbed the radio immediately. Who is this? No response. Only soft static. He checked the channel indicator. Disconnected. The building intercom system had been shut down months earlier during electrical repairs. Nikolai slowly looked back toward the elevator. The doors were closing. But before they fully shut, he noticed something impossible reflected in the elevator mirror. Another corridor behind him. Not the lobby. A long apartment hallway lit by dim fluorescent lights. And for one brief second someone standing at the far end of it. The elevator doors shut completely. The reflection vanished with them. Nikolai remained standing in the lobby for several seconds without moving, staring at his own distorted reflection in the scratched metal doors. The corridor in the mirror had looked real. Not shadowy. Not dreamlike. Real fluorescent lighting. Real apartment doors. Real linoleum flooring stretching into darkness. And someone had definitely been standing there. He told himself it was exhaustion. Night shifts distort perception after enough hours. Reflections move strangely under weak lighting. The human brain fills empty spaces automatically when surrounded by silence too long. Still, Nikolai found himself checking the lobby behind him again. Nothing there except mailboxes and the entrance desk. Outside, snow drifted slowly through the courtyard beneath orange streetlights. The entire residential block looked dead at this hour. Most apartment windows remained dark except for a few distant televisions glowing blue through curtains several buildings away. The elevator suddenly groaned again. Nikolai turned sharply. The cabin was moving upward now. The numbers climbed slowly above the door. No one had entered. No one had called it. The old lift continued ascending floor by floor through the sleeping building. Nikolai grabbed the radio from the desk again. "Control, do you copy?" Only static answered him. Then, beneath the interference, came faint breathing. Not electronic noise. Human breathing. Slow. Uneven. Nikolai lowered the radio immediately. The elevator kept climbing. Its cables whined somewhere deep inside the shaft like metal under strain. Then the lights inside the lobby flickered. Once. Twice. The fluorescent bulbs dimmed long enough for the entire room to sink briefly into grey darkness. And during that moment, Nikolai heard footsteps above him. Not from the staircase. From inside the ceiling. Soft movement crossing slowly overhead. He looked upward instinctively. The sound stopped immediately. Silence returned. Then the elevator display changed again. The cabin stopped. The building fell completely still. Nikolai waited. Nothing happened. 30 seconds passed. Then 1 full minute. Finally, the elevator began moving again. But this time the indicator did not descend. The number above the door flickered once. And changed to 14. The old lift groaned loudly somewhere above the building. Higher than it should have been able to go. Nikolai felt cold spread slowly across his arms. The building only had 13 floors. He knew that. Everyone knew that. But the cables continued moving upward beyond the final level. The number 14 remained glowing steadily above the elevator door for almost 20 seconds. Then came the sound. The elevator doors opening somewhere far above the building. A distant metallic clank echoed faintly through the shaft. And after that silence. Nikolai stared at the display. 14 still glowed overhead. Without really understanding why, he reached for the stairwell keys hanging beside the reception desk. The rational part of his brain kept searching for explanations. Faulty wiring. Broken sensors. Old Soviet electrical systems were infamous for strange malfunctions during winter power fluctuations. But another part of him already knew he was lying to himself. The stairwell lights buzzed weakly as Nikolai climbed upward through the building. Concrete walls trapped the smell of dust, old cooking oil, and cigarette smoke inside the narrow staircase. Most residents slept behind locked apartment doors now. The higher he climbed, the quieter the building became. By the 10th floor, even the pipe noises had stopped. Only his footsteps remained. 12th floor. 13th floor. Nikolai stopped beside the final landing and looked upward. There should have been nothing above him except the roof access ladder. Instead, another staircase continued into darkness. One more flight. The overhead light above it flickered softly. Nikolai felt his stomach tighten. He had worked inside Building 47 for nearly 3 months. That staircase had never been there before. Very slowly, he climbed higher. The air changed immediately. Colder. Not winter cold. Unused room cold. The kind of stale chill trapped inside abandoned places for years. The staircase ended at another hallway door identical to every other residential floor in the building. A rusted metal number hung above it. Nikolai stood motionless. The management company blueprint showed no 14th floor. No apartments. No utilities. Nothing. And yet the hallway door stood directly in front of him. Slightly open. Dim fluorescent light spilled through the gap into the stairwell. Then Nikolai heard something from inside. A television playing softly somewhere far down the corridor. Followed by distant laughter. Not loud. Ordinary laughter. Like people sitting inside apartments late at night. The building suddenly no longer felt abandoned above 13. It felt occupied. And slowly, almost carefully, the hallway door began opening wider by itself. The hallway door opened slowly inward with a low metallic creak. Warm light spilled into the stairwell. Not bright. Not welcoming. Just enough to reveal faded wallpaper stretching along a narrow apartment corridor beyond the doorway. Nikolai remained frozen on the landing. The television sound continued somewhere deep inside the floor. An old movie maybe. Occasionally interrupted by soft static and distant voices behind walls. Ordinary apartment noise. That was the worst part. Nothing about the place immediately looked supernatural. It looked lived in. The fluorescent ceiling lights buzzed softly overhead while Nikolai stepped carefully through the doorway onto the 14th floor. The air smelled stale. Dust. Old fabric. Boiled potatoes. The familiar scent of Soviet apartment blocks trapped for decades inside concrete walls. The corridor itself looked older than the rest of Building 47. Dark wooden apartment doors lined both sides of the hallway beneath faded unit numbers. Brown carpet runners stretched along the floor, worn smooth in places as if people still walked there regularly. But the building should not have contained this floor at all. Nikolai slowly turned in place. The hallway extended much farther than the lower floors. Too far. Building 47 was narrow by design. Every residential level below contained short corridors branching from a central stairwell. But floor 14 stretched endlessly ahead beneath rows of flickering fluorescent lights. The geometry felt wrong. Like the building had become larger on the inside. A television laughed somewhere behind one of the apartment walls. Then a toilet flushed faintly farther down the corridor. Nikolai swallowed hard. Someone was living here. Or something wanted him to believe that. He reached for the radio clipped to his jacket. "Control, do you copy?" Only static answered. Then the same woman's voice whispered through the interference. "Don't let them see you looking." Nikolai turned sharply toward the sound. Silence again. The hallway remained empty. Very slowly, he began walking deeper into floor 14. Apartment numbers passed beside him. The brass numbers looked ancient, their edges darkened with age and cigarette smoke. Several doors contained old Soviet holiday decorations still hanging from the frames. Small paper snowflakes. Tarnished metal stars. Like the resident stopped updating anything sometime during the 1980s. A low hum echoed constantly through the corridor. Electrical. Almost soothing after a while. Nikolai noticed something else too. Every apartment door had a peephole, and several of them became dark suddenly as he passed. Someone watching from inside. His pace slowed immediately. The television noise stopped. Now the corridor felt completely silent except for the fluorescent buzzing overhead. Then one apartment door clicked softly behind him. Nikolai turned. Door 1408 stood slightly open now. Warm yellow light spilled through the narrow gap. For several seconds nothing moved. Then an elderly woman looked out slowly into the hallway. She wore an old wool sweater and pale house slippers. Grey hair tied back neatly. Thin tired face. Perfectly ordinary. The woman studied Nikolai carefully without speaking. Finally she asked, "Are you the new night guard?" Her voice sounded normal. Human. Nikolai stared at her in disbelief. "What floor is this?" The woman frowned slightly. "The 14th. That floor doesn't exist." Her expression changed very subtly after hearing that. Not confusion. Disappointment. "You shouldn't say that here." The corridor lights flickered overhead. For one brief second, the apartment behind her appeared dark and rotten inside. Mold climbing the walls. Furniture collapsed beneath dust. Then warm light returned immediately. The apartment looked normal again. Nikolai took a slow step backward. The old woman continued watching him. "You came upstairs after midnight," she said softly. "Now the building knows you." A distant elevator bell echoed somewhere far behind him down the endless corridor. Someone else had arrived on floor 14. Nikolai looked toward the sound instinctively. At the far end of the hallway, the elevator doors stood open. And a man was stepping out slowly into the corridor. Tall. Dark coat. Head lowered. At first Nikolai thought it might be another tenant. Then the man lifted his face toward the fluorescent light. And Nikolai realized he had no eyes. Only smooth pale skin where the eyes should have been. The old woman quietly closed her apartment door. Locks clicked rapidly from inside. All along the hallway, other apartment doors began locking too. One after another. Click. 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 The eyeless man started walking toward Nikolai. Not fast. Not aggressively. Just steadily. The fluorescent lights dimmed overhead as he approached. His movements looked slightly delayed, almost like old film frames skipping during playback. Nikolai backed away instinctively. Then he heard another sound behind him. Apartment doors opening. Slowly. He turned. Residents now stood silently in several doorways farther down the corridor. Men. Women. Children. All watching him. None of them blinking. The corridor suddenly felt much colder. And somewhere deep inside the walls of floor 14 the elevator cables began moving again. The eyeless man continued walking toward Nikolai through the dim corridor. Slow steps. Soft steps. Almost polite. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed weaker each time he moved beneath them, causing sections of floor 14 to pulse between warm yellow light and brief moments of darkness. The residents standing in the apartment doorways never moved. They simply watched. Nikolai backed away carefully, trying not to lose sight of either end of the corridor. His breathing sounded unnaturally loud now. Even the old building itself seemed quieter, as if the concrete walls were listening. The eyeless man stopped roughly 20 feet away. His dark winter coat looked wet around the shoulders, though no snow existed on floor 14. Thin water stains spread slowly across the carpet beneath his shoes. Then he spoke. "You stayed too long downstairs." His voice sounded distant. Not echoing. Distant. Like someone speaking through several walls at once. Nikolai tightened his grip on the flashlight hanging from his belt. "What is this place?" No one answered immediately. The corridor lights flickered again. And suddenly all the apartment televisions turned on at once. The noise exploded across floor 14. Old Soviet news broadcasts. Children's cartoons. Weather reports. Static. Dozens of overlapping sounds bleeding together through the hallway walls. Nikolai flinched. The eyeless man tilted his head slightly, listening to the noise with something almost resembling curiosity. Then every television shut off together. Silence returned instantly. And one apartment door farther down the corridor slowly opened wider. Apartment 1411. Warm yellow light spilled into the hallway. A radio played softly inside. Nikolai stared at the open doorway. Something about the apartment felt familiar. Not visually. Emotionally. The strange heavy feeling of remembering a place he had never visited before. The eyeless man spoke again. "She wants to talk to you." Nikolai should have run. Every instinct told him that. Back to the stairwell. Back downstairs. Out of building 47 completely. But fear inside places like this becomes strange after a while. It stops feeling sharp. Stops feeling urgent. The longer Nikolai stood on floor 14, the more unreal the rest of the world began to seem. As if the building itself slowly disconnected people from normal thought. He walked toward apartment 1411. The residents watched him silently from their doorways as he passed. None of them blinked. Inside the apartment, old furniture sat beneath warm yellow lamps. Floral wallpaper peeled gently from the walls. A half-finished dinner rested on the kitchen table beside cold tea and black bread. The radio near the window produced soft static between fragments of distant music. And sitting in the living room chair beside it was a woman Nikolai recognized immediately. Irina Volkova. Apartment 83. Third floor. Missing since November. The police searched building 47 for 2 weeks after her disappearance. Nikolai himself had helped check the basement storage rooms. Irina looked exactly the same now as she did in the missing person's photograph. Same dark sweater. Same tired expression. She looked up slowly when Nikolai entered. "You shouldn't have come upstairs," she said quietly. Nikolai stared at her in disbelief. "They said you disappeared." Irina gave a weak smile. "They all disappear eventually." The apartment lights dimmed briefly. For a second, Nikolai saw the room differently. Dust covered everything. The food on the table had rotted black. The wallpaper hung in mold-covered strips. Then the warm apartment returned again. Irina noticed his expression immediately. "You're starting to see both versions now." Nikolai stepped backward toward the hallway. "What is this floor?" Irina looked toward the radio beside her chair. The static grew louder for a moment. Then she answered carefully. The building was different during Soviet times. There used to be maintenance levels between residential floors. Storage areas. Utility corridors. During construction, people died here. The radio crackled. Electrical accident on upper-level static swallowed the rest. Irina continued speaking softly over it. After the fire in 1986, they sealed part of the structure. Officially, floor 14 stopped existing. Nikolai remembered the elevator now. The hidden button. The impossible staircase. "The building still remembers it," Irina whispered. From somewhere deep inside the corridor outside came the sound of children laughing softly. Nikolai turned toward the doorway instinctively. Several children now stood at the far end of floor 14 beneath flickering fluorescent lights. All pale. All silent. All watching the apartment. One little girl held a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her eyes were completely black. Irina's expression changed immediately when she saw them. "You need to leave now." The apartment lights flickered harder. The warm illusion around the room began collapsing rapidly. Wallpaper darkened with moisture. Furniture sagged beneath decay. Thick dust spread across the floorboards before Nikolai's eyes. The radio screamed with sudden static. Then a calm female voice emerged through the interference. "The elevator is coming back." Somewhere deep inside the walls, the old elevator cables groaned loudly. Moving upward again. Toward floor 14. The elevator moved somewhere above the building with a long metallic groan. Not upward anymore. Closer. The cables shuddered violently inside the walls of floor 14 while the fluorescent lights dimmed across the corridor outside apartment 1411. Irina stood immediately. "You have to go before the doors open." Nikolai looked toward the hallway. "What happens when it arrives?" Irina did not answer right away. That frightened him more than anything else. The apartment around them continued decaying in slow waves now. The warm yellow lighting flickered between two different realities. One moment the room looked lived in. The next it appeared abandoned for decades beneath mold and water damage. The radio hissed louder beside the window. "Residents are advised to remain inside," static swallowed the announcement. Upper maintenance level unstable. Nikolai suddenly noticed movement beyond the apartment window. He stepped closer instinctively. Outside should have been Saint Petersburg. Courtyards. Streetlights. Snow-covered cars. Instead, there was only darkness. Endless darkness surrounding the building from every side. Floor 14 was no longer connected to the city. Irina grabbed his arm sharply. "Don't look outside too long." Nikolai turned back toward her. For the first time, he noticed how exhausted she looked. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Skin unnaturally pale beneath the apartment light. Like someone who had stopped sleeping long ago. "You've been trapped here since November?" Irina nodded slowly. "At first you can still leave sometimes." Her voice shook slightly now. "The building lets you go during daylight. But every night the elevator comes back." The cables groaned again. "Closer now." The sound moved directly through the walls surrounding the apartment. Irina lowered her voice. "Eventually it stops taking you downstairs." A loud bell echoed across floor 14. The elevator had arrived. Every apartment light in the corridor outside shut off simultaneously. Darkness flooded the hallway. Only weak emergency lighting remained beneath the ceiling now, casting long shadows across the carpet runners outside. And then came the sound of doors opening. Not apartment doors. Elevator doors. A deep metallic slide echoed through the floor. Nikolai stepped into the hallway carefully. The residents were gone. Every doorway now stood empty. The eyeless man had disappeared too. Only the children remained at the far end of the corridor beneath flickering emergency lights. Standing perfectly still. Watching. Then Nikolai noticed something impossible. The hallway itself had changed. Longer now. Much longer. The elevator stood impossibly far away despite being only one corridor over minutes earlier. The fluorescent light stretched endlessly between them like repeating copies of the same ceiling section over and over again. The geometry of floor 14 was shifting. The building was rearranging itself. A soft ding echoed from the elevator again. Waiting. Irina appeared beside Nikolai holding the old apartment radio in both hands. Static whispered continuously from its speaker now. "It wants you to enter willingly," she said. "What does?" Before she could answer, movement appeared inside the elevator far down the corridor. Figures standing inside. Tenants. Dozens of them packed motionless beneath flickering cabin lights. All silent. All facing outward toward Nikolai. Some wore old Soviet clothing from the 80s. Others looked modern. Several appeared badly decomposed beneath the fluorescent light. One man still wore a winter police uniform covered in black water stains. The elevator remained open. Waiting. Then every figure inside slowly lifted their heads toward Nikolai at exactly the same moment. The radio in Irina's hands crackled violently. A woman's voice whispered through the static. "There's room for one more." The children at the far end of the hallway suddenly began laughing softly. Not normal laughter. Repeating laughter. Like damaged recordings looping incorrectly. Nikolai backed away immediately. The elevator lights flickered. And now he saw someone else standing inside among the silent passengers. Himself. Another Nikolai stood near the rear wall of the cabin wearing the same security jacket and holding the same flashlight. Except his face looked wrong. Too pale. Eyes completely black. The duplicate version of Nikolai smiled slowly from inside the elevator. Then stepped forward. Out into the corridor. The real Nikolai stumbled backward in shock. Behind him, apartment 1411 suddenly went dark. Irina grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. The stairwell changes after midnight. You need to find the old maintenance stairs. What maintenance stairs? The ones behind the walls. The duplicate Nikolai continued walking toward them down the endless corridor. Its movements looked slightly delayed, like a copied recording struggling to imitate real human motion. More apartment doors began opening around them. Residents emerging silently once again. Watching. Waiting. Irina pointed toward a section of wallpaper near the corridor corner. There. Nikolai tore the wallpaper aside with both hands. Behind it stood another door. Old steel. Industrial. Painted over decades ago. A faded Soviet warning label remained barely visible beneath rust. Utility access, level 14B. The duplicate version of Nikolai stopped walking. Its smile vanished instantly. And for the first time since entering floor 14, the thing pretending to be him looked afraid. The duplicate version of Nikolai stood motionless beneath the flickering corridor lights. Watching the hidden utility door. Watching them. Its face no longer looked fully human now. The smile had disappeared completely, leaving behind something flat and unfinished, like the building itself had only copied the shape of a person without understanding how expressions truly worked. The residents lining the hallway began stepping slowly from their apartments. One by one. Silent. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder as the corridor stretched farther into impossible darkness behind them. Irina grabbed Nikolai's arm again. Open it. He pulled the rusted utility handle hard. At first nothing moved. Then the old steel door groaned inward with a violent metallic crack, releasing a wave of stale freezing air from the darkness behind the walls of floor 14. A narrow maintenance staircase descended sharply into blackness. The duplicate Nikolai suddenly started running toward them. Not human running. Wrong. Its limbs moved too fast between steps, jerking unnaturally beneath the corridor lights like frames missing from old film. Nikolai and Irina rushed through the doorway together. He slammed the steel door shut seconds before something struck it violently from the other side. Boom! The entire staircase shook. Another impact followed immediately. Boom! Rust drifted from the ceiling above them while distorted voices whispered through the metal. Please open the door. Nikolai backed away, breathing hard. That was not his voice anymore. Multiple voices now spoke together outside. Residents. Children. The eyeless man. All speaking through the same mouth. We live here. The staircase lights flickered weakly below them. Old Soviet maintenance bulbs stretched downward through narrow concrete walls covered in pipes and electrical conduits. The air smelled of wet dust and overheated wiring. Far above, another violent impact rattled the steel door. Then silence. Irina began descending immediately. Nikolai followed. The staircase seemed far deeper than it should have been. Building 47 only had 13 residential floors, but the maintenance stairs continued downward beneath the structure for several minutes without ending. The building around them groaned constantly. Not settling noises. Movement. Like enormous weight shifting slowly inside the walls. Nikolai finally asked the question he had been avoiding since entering floor 14. What is this place really? Irina kept walking. When they rebuilt the building after the fire, they sealed people inside. Nikolai stared at her. The official reports blamed electrical failure. But the upper maintenance levels burned too fast. Smoke filled the elevators first. Her voice remained calm, almost numb now. Some residents never escaped. The staircase lights dimmed again. Then brightened. Irina continued. Afterward, tenants started reporting impossible hallways. Extra apartments. Voices coming through disconnected intercoms. People seeing dead neighbors inside elevators. Another deep metallic groan echoed somewhere far above them. The elevator. Still moving. Still searching. The staircase finally ended at a concrete maintenance corridor hidden beneath the building foundation. Thick steam pipes lined the walls beside ancient electrical systems humming softly in darkness. Nikolai looked around in disbelief. This entire level had been erased from official building plans. Rows of sealed storage rooms stretched endlessly beneath the structure. Some doors remained welded shut. Others hung partially open, revealing collapsed furniture and old Soviet maintenance equipment inside dust-covered chambers. Then Nikolai noticed the photographs. Hundreds of them taped along one corridor wall. Tenant photographs. Missing persons reports. Building employees. Police officers. Maintenance workers. Decades of faces. Some old black and white. Some recent color prints. All people who disappeared inside Building 47. Irina stopped walking beside the photographs. It keeps copies of people. Nikolai slowly looked back toward the staircase behind them. Soft elevator music drifted faintly downward through the pipes overhead. Old Soviet orchestral music. Distorted. Closer than before. Then came the sound of elevator doors opening somewhere inside the walls beneath the building. Not above them. Below. Nikolai felt genuine panic rise through his chest. The elevator was underneath them now. The lights in the maintenance corridor suddenly shut off. Darkness swallowed everything. Irina grabbed his sleeve immediately. Don't move. The music continued somewhere nearby in the blackness. Then footsteps emerged from the dark corridor ahead. Slow. Measured. Not one person. Many. Nikolai could hear breathing now too. Wet breathing mixed with the soft hum of elevator cables moving somewhere impossible beneath the floor. A dim emergency light flickered on at the far end of the corridor. And under that weak red light people stood waiting. Dozens of them. Residents from floor 14. The eyeless man. The children. And among them stood multiple versions of Nikolai himself. All silent. All staring. One of them slowly raised a hand and pointed deeper into the maintenance level. Toward another elevator door built directly into the concrete foundation wall. The old elevator bell rang softly. Ding. The door slid open. Warm yellow apartment light spilled from inside the cabin. And Nikolai finally saw where the elevator truly went. Not another floor. Another version of the building. An endless maze of corridors stretching infinitely beneath St. Petersburg, filled with apartments that should not exist and people who never managed to leave. The copies inside turned toward him together. Smiling. Waiting for him to enter. Irina whispered beside him. If you step inside after midnight, the building remembers you forever. The emergency lights flickered violently. Then everything went dark. According to official city records, Building 47 partially collapsed during renovation work in March of 2025. Several sealed maintenance sections were discovered beneath the structure, including undocumented utility corridors hidden behind the original Soviet foundations. No 14th floor was ever found. At least officially. But residents living in nearby apartment blocks still report strange elevator malfunctions during winter nights. Sometimes the old lifts stop above the highest floor for several minutes before returning empty. And occasionally, security guards working overnight shifts claim they hear televisions playing somewhere inside the walls after 2 a.m. Especially when the elevator display briefly shows a number that does not belong in the building.